Hi everyone, welcome back. Thanks for joining us today. We've got a brand new story to share with you. So let's begin. My name's Graham. See, I believe every man has a limit where enough is enough. It piles up until one day, and you realize you're done. For me, that moment came when my girlfriend, Cecilia, decided to take a girls' trip without telling me. It was the final straw. She never thought I'd walk away. She assumed I'd just sit through it, the way I had been doing for months. Now I know that might sound drastic, and maybe it would be if that were the first issue we had. But it wasn't. Far from it. So, to make you understand how I got to this point, why I chose to leave without warning, I need to take you back to how it all started. Because this didn't happen overnight. So, here's the whole story. Cecilia and I were together for a little over 5 years. From early on, I was upfront with her about one key thing. I wasn't interested in getting married legally. My reason wasn't out of fear of commitment, like people often assume. It was deeper than that. I've seen too many situations go south, and it always gets worse when the legal system gets involved. Divorce courts, lawyers, paperwork, dragged out battles. It becomes a mess. I didn't want that kind of third-party interference in my personal life. If a relationship ended, I wanted it to end with dignity, not court summonses and property disputes. At first, Cecilia pushed back a little. She asked questions and tried to understand why. She made a few arguments here and there about commitment, about security, about the future. But when she saw that I wasn't budging on it, she didn't make it a war. Eventually, she said something I held on to for a long time. She told me she loved me, and she didn't want to lose me over something like legal paperwork. She said that what mattered most to her was that we loved each other, and that we were building something real. In her words, a piece of paper wasn't going to define our relationship. And I respected her for not walking away from me, because of my beliefs. I loved her for that. And speaking of Cecilia, she was what most people would call the full package. Beautiful, no doubt, but also intelligent. Socially, she was always active. She had friends from every walk of life, and people gravitated toward her. She is always planning something, always going somewhere, and she has her own things going on. To me, we were a strong pair. Two people with different views on some things, but united in how we felt about each other. Or, at least, that's what I believed in the beginning. At around the 3-year mark in our relationship, Cecilia was going through a bit of a rough patch in her career. She was in between jobs, trying to make a switch from her old role into something new, and the uncertainty was clearly stressing her out. She wasn't the type to openly ask for help, but I could see it. She needed some kind of stability, a bit of breathing room to land on her feet. We'd been dating for a while by then, and I felt responsible in a way. So I suggested we move in together. At the time, my apartment wasn't much better space-wise, especially not for two people. So we went out, searched for a place together, and ended up leasing a bigger apartment. We signed a joint lease, put both our names on it. Living together also meant we had to be more intentional about our finances. We started combining some expenses. Nothing was strictly formal, but it became a habit. I naturally fell into the role of the planner. Cecilia, on the other hand, was more on the spontaneous side. She liked to go with the flow, and while that could be fun sometimes, it also meant I was usually the one making sure we weren't overspending or missing important payments. I didn't mind it too much. I figured we were just balancing each other out. On the surface, everything looked good. We felt like a proper couple building a life side by side. But it wasn't long before I started to notice things. And at that point, I wasn't ready to admit something might be off. I just thought we were adjusting, growing. Turns out, I was giving the benefit of the doubt more often than I should have. When we weren't living together, it was easier to let stuff slide. If she went out with her friends or took weekend trips, I could shrug it off. But once we were under the same roof, everything felt a little more exposed. Now, I'm not the controlling type. I wasn't out here telling her to stay home or change who she was overnight. But I did expect that once we decided to live together, there would be some shift in priorities, some kind of adjustment that reflects that we were building a life together. But with Cecilia, it started to feel like she never really moved past that baddie phase. You know, the one where every weekend is booked with parties, girls' nights, or random out-of-town getaways. And look, I get it. People have their ways of unwinding. And I'm not anti-fun. But this wasn't just a once-in-a-while thing. It was starting to become a pattern. Almost every weekend. At first, I felt it wasn't worth bringing up. But over time, it started eating at me. There's a difference between being in a relationship and living like you're single with someone else in the house due to the person's prolonged absence. So, one morning, I finally decided to say something. I called her and I told her, look, I know we're not married, but this is still a committed relationship. And I'm not comfortable with how often you're out partying or doing all these girls' weekends. It doesn't feel right. I figured if this relationship was going to work, communication had to be part of it. To her credit, she didn't blow up or get defensive in that moment. She listened quietly, and after a pause, she said she hadn't realized it bothered me that much. In her eyes, it wasn't that serious. But, she added, if it was affecting me, she'd try to put some control on it. She said she loved me, and she didn't want me feeling like I came second to a good time. And I believed her. I remember thinking, all right, maybe we just hit our first real bump, but we handled it like adults. For a while after that, I felt reassured, and that gave me hope that we were on the same page after all. Those next few months felt peaceful. We had our typical little misunderstandings, but nothing major. Just the usual couple stuff. It wasn't perfect, but it felt like we had found a rhythm. I remember thinking, okay, maybe this could really last. But that's the funny thing about peace. It's often the calm before the storm. A little over 2 years into this new phase, things started to go bad again. The turning point for me was our joint account. Now, ever since we moved in together, we have decided to share finances to some degree. We each kept a personal account, but we also had one joint account for rent, groceries, bills, basic shared stuff. We agreed to be transparent with it. But one day, I was reviewing the bank statement, just doing my usual end-of-month check, and I noticed something weird. There were charges that didn't line up with what Cecilia had told me. She'd said she was going out of town to visit family for the weekend, but some of the transactions were made in a completely different area, nowhere near her family's place, and it made no sense given where she said she was. Still, I didn't bring it up, but letting it go didn't make the feeling go away. In fact, the longer I sat with it, the more it gnawed at me. I didn't want to believe we were slipping again, but the suspicion just kept growing. One Saturday, I had the weekend off, so I was home. Cecilia had invited a couple of her friends over. That wasn't unusual. They were all sitting in the living room while I was in the bedroom with the door slightly open. I just happened to hear the conversation while I was inside. They were laughing, chatting about dating apps and relationships, and then I heard Cecilia say, "Honestly, I'm basically single." The second I heard those words, I froze. There was laughter like it were a joke. Maybe to them it was. But to me, it wasn't funny. I didn't say anything right away. I let the day go on. Her friends stayed for another hour or so. And when they finally left, and she came into the room and asked her calmly, "Hey, what did you mean earlier when you said you're basically single?" She rolled her eyes and said, "God, you're so sensitive lately." That response told me everything I needed to know. That was how she saw our relationship. That night, I didn't argue. From that point on, it was like we couldn't have a simple conversation without it turning into a full-blown argument. It didn't matter how carefully I chose my words or how calm I was. If I brought up something that bothered me, she'd either get defensive like I was attacking her, or sarcastic like I was being dramatic. Sometimes she'd even flip the whole thing around and make it seem like I was the problem for making a big deal out of nothing. There was no real resolution, just tension that never really went away. The worst part? The more we fought, the more she did the exact things we had already talked about. It almost felt intentional, like she wanted to prove a point or punish me for speaking up. If we fought about her disappearing for hours without saying where she was going, then the next week she'd leave the house again and not tell me anything at all. If I said I wasn't cool with her partying every weekend, she'd go out and stay out even later. It was like she took every disagreement as a challenge. How far could she push before I finally broke? And I'll admit this, after a while, I just stopped bringing stuff up. I got tired. Arguing wasn't getting me anywhere. Trying to have adult conversations didn't help. So I started holding it all in, thinking maybe if I didn't push so hard, she'd see the effort and meet me halfway. But that was a mistake. Saying nothing didn't keep the peace. It just gave her more room to do whatever she wanted without consequence. Sometimes she'd leave for the whole night, and I'd just be sitting there wondering if she was okay, or worse, wondering who she was with. And when I did ask, I'd get vague excuses like, oh, I stayed at a friend's, or it was too late to drive back. But there was never a heads up beforehand, never any consideration. I want to be clear here, this wasn't about control. I didn't need to monitor her every move. I just wanted respect, communication, and basic relationship courtesy. But the more I stayed silent, the more invisible I became in my own home. So I came home from work one Tuesday evening, but the apartment was quiet. At first, I didn't think too much of it. Cecilia usually beats me home by a good hour or so, but sometimes traffic happens. I changed out of my work clothes, got a drink, and waited. 30 minutes passed. Still no sign of her. I checked the time again. An hour gone. Still nothing. I sent her a message. Where are you? 30 minutes later, she finally responded. She said she took a leave from work to have a girls' trip, that it skipped her mind to tell me because I was busy. The logic didn't hold. Nothing about that message made sense. Not the timing, not the tone, not the excuse. It didn't add up, and more than anything, it didn't feel respectful. How do you forget to mention a trip to your live-in partner? Someone you share space and life with? That was it for me. It became crystal clear. This is who she is. And I finally accepted that I didn't want to do this anymore. I didn't want to spend another month, another week. Hell, not even another day, trying to convince someone to treat me like I mattered. I took a breath and typed back one last reply. I won't be here when you get back. I wish you the life you're chasing, but I'm not waiting around to be a backup plan. She responded, confused. What do you mean? But I didn't reply. I had already said everything I needed to say. For once, I didn't let her draw me into another round of emotional back and forth. That night, I packed up everything I owned. Anything that had my name or my energy attached to it, I took it. I didn't leave a single item behind for her to use as an excuse to contact me again. By the next morning, I had moved out. I went straight to the leasing office and applied to remove my name from the lease. I cut off her contact, blocked her on everything. She tried reaching out. A new number popped up on my phone later that week. You're really just leaving? Then we can talk. But I didn't respond, because I meant what I said. I was done. So, a few days go by. I knew the date she was supposed to be back from her little girl's trip. She called me that evening with another new number, probably right after unlocking the door and realizing what had happened. I didn't know it was her, so I picked, but when I heard her voice, I ended it. She called back, but I let it ring. Then she called again, and again. I didn't answer. She moved from calls to texts. Same number. The first message said, "You're really just leaving?" Then another one followed. "We can talk about it." I looked at the screen for a while. I just felt done because everything I had to say, I had already said. I blocked the new number and went on with my evening. And that's where I'm at now. I know some of you watching might be thinking, why didn't you at least give her a final conversation? A proper ending? But here's what I'll say. Sometimes people mistake your silence for cruelty when it's actually mercy. When someone shows you over and over that your peace doesn't matter to them, eventually, you choose it for yourself. Quietly. So what do you all think? Was I wrong to leave like that? If you were in my shoes, what would you have done? Let me know in the comments. Hi everyone, welcome back. Thanks for joining us today. We've got a brand new story to share with you, so let's begin. I'm Jay, and for 5 years, I was a happily married man, or at least I thought I was. My wife, Lisa, and I had what most people would call a stable, healthy relationship. We didn't have major fights, we supported each other, and for the most part, life felt normal and comfortable. That's what marriage is supposed to be, right? A partnership where you grow together, build a life, and trust that no matter what happens, you have each other's back. But lately, things have fell off. At first, I didn't pick up on it right away. It was subtle, the kind of thing you could easily chalk up to stress, a bad mood, or just one of those weeks where things feel a little off balance. But as time went on, those small shifts turned into something I couldn't ignore anymore. Lisa had always been an affectionate woman. In the past, when I walked through the front door after work, she'd greet me with a warm embrace, sometimes pulling me in for a long, slow kiss, like she actually missed me. But lately, the kisses were barely there. A quick peck, like someone kissing a distant relative out of obligation. Conversations used to flow effortlessly between us. We could talk about anything. But now, she was barely engaging. I'd ask her how work was, and she'd give me short, clipped answers. The warmth in her voice was gone. The laughter, the teasing, the playfulness disappeared. It was like we were coexisting rather than living as a couple. And then came the mood swings. 1 minute, she'd be distant, lost in thought. The next, she'd snap at me over the smallest things. I'd ask if she was okay, or if something was bothering her, and she'd always say she was fine. Every time, I'd press just a little more, hoping she'd let me in. "Are you sure?" I'd ask. And every time the answer was the same, "I'm fine, Jay." But I knew she wasn't. The more I tried to rationalize her behavior, the more it ate at me. I thought back to the early years of our marriage, when everything felt easy. We'd talk for hours, without even realizing it. We'd lie in bed, tangled in each other's arms, whispering about our plans. We were a team. And now, it felt like she was pulling away, slowly but surely, like a tide receding from the shore. I tried harder. I planned date nights. I made more effort to check in on her emotionally. And I even started doing little things around the house that I knew she appreciated, just to see if it would bring some kind of reaction. But nothing changed. One night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of the growing silence between us. It had been months since Lisa and I had been intimate. I couldn't figure out why. I had spent hours reading online about how to reconnect with a distant spouse, skimming through articles, relationship advice threads, and even those stupid Save Your Marriage forums written by guys who sounded just as lost as I felt. One thing kept coming up: intimacy. Apparently, physical touch could rekindle emotional closeness. The logic made sense. Lisa and I had barely touched each other lately. No warm hugs, no playful teasing, just those quick, empty kisses that felt more like an afterthought than an actual expression of love, and those were not consistent either. So, I decided to try something simple. I reached out and gently took her hand. Just a small gesture, nothing forceful. The second my fingers brushed against hers, she jerked away, like I had burned her. "Just leave me alone." Her voice was cold. I turned to my side and decided to put in more effort. "Lisa, talk to me." My voice was soft and careful. "What's wrong? Did I do something?" She didn't turn to look at me. She didn't move. She just lay there rigid, like she was waiting for me to stop talking. I reached out again, this time just placing a hand on her shoulder, desperate for her to look at me, say something. Anything that would make this moment feel less like a nightmare. And then, she snapped. She whipped around, her voice sharper than I had ever heard it before. "Don't touch me. I can't stand you." The words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. I actually felt my body tense, as if I had been physically struck. I searched her face, desperate for any sign that she didn't mean it, that she had misspoken, that it was just frustration talking. But there was nothing there, just cold, detached disgust. I couldn't even respond. My mind just shut down. I rolled onto my back, staring up at the ceiling, completely numb. And for the first time since we got married, I wasn't sure if it could ever be fixed. I stopped asking questions. Not because I didn't want answers, but because I already knew I wasn't going to get them. It's like I am just a roommate rather than the man she had once claimed to love. So I decided to watch instead of ask. I paid attention to the small details in the days that followed. Lisa had started falling asleep in random places. She'd doze off at the dining table, her head resting on her folded arms, while her laptop sat open in front of her. I once found her asleep on the couch in the middle of the afternoon, her phone still clutched in her hand, screen dimmed from inactivity. That wasn't normal. Lisa had never been the type to just knock out anywhere like that. Then, there were the mornings. She always looked exhausted, even after getting a full night's sleep. Sometimes she would rush straight to the bathroom, and I would hear the toilet flush minutes later, like she had been sick, like she had thrown up. And then, the most concerning part, she was leaving the house more often. Lisa had never been secretive before. If she had an errand to run, she would say something. If she was meeting up with friends, she'd tell me who she was with and where she was going. But lately, she would just disappear. I would come home from work, and she wouldn't be there. No text. No note. Nothing. Then, hours later, she would just stroll in like she hadn't been gone all day. If I asked where she had been, she would always dodge the question, acting like I was being ridiculous for even asking. I thought about following her myself to investigate, but seems like I won't do it properly. So, I hired a private investigator. It took a week. "We have confirmation," the investigator said. And just like that, everything made sense. Lisa was seeing someone else. This was the answer I had been searching for. This was why she couldn't look at me anymore. I could have confronted her right then and there. I could have thrown the evidence in her face, demanded an explanation, and watched her squirm under the weight of her own betrayal. But I didn't, because at that moment I realized something else. She had already made her choice. She had already decided I wasn't enough. And I wasn't about to sit there and beg a woman to love me when she had already handed that love to someone else. No, she didn't deserve a fight. She deserved to be blindsided. I made my decision right then and there. I was going to divorce her, and I was going to make sure she never saw it coming. The house was quiet when I walked in one evening. I had left work early, determined to find a missing document I needed for the divorce process. My lawyer had asked for it days ago, and I had been putting off looking for it. I went straight to our bedroom, heading to my side of the closet where I kept all my important paperwork. I rummaged through the shelves, flipping through folders, and checking between stacks of old receipts and bank statements. Nothing. Frustrated, I sighed and ran a hand over my face. Maybe I had left it somewhere else. Then a thought struck me. What if Lisa had accidentally put it with her things? It wouldn't be the first time something of mine ended up on her side of the closet. Without thinking much of it, I turned to her side and started checking through her things. But what I found instead knocked the air out of my lungs. There, tucked inside a plain, white envelope, was a pregnancy scan result. For a few seconds, my brain refused to process what I was looking at. Lisa was pregnant. My hands trembled as I slowly pulled the paper out, my eyes scanning the details. Over a month along, I felt my heartbeat hammering against my ribcage. She never told me. Why? I read the date on the ultrasound. My mind started calculating, putting together the timeline. Was this why she had been so distant? Was this why she had snapped at me that night in bed? Why she had looked at me like I was a stranger she couldn't stand? And then a far more terrifying thought lodged itself into my brain. Could it even be mine? This couldn't wait. I couldn't sit on this information, couldn't pretend I didn't know. I needed answers now. I didn't even remember how the rest of that evening passed. Time blurred together, and all I could do was sit there, trying to keep my thoughts from spiraling into something darker than anger. The sound of keys rattling at the door brought my thoughts back. The door swung open, and Lisa stepped inside, completely unaware of the storm waiting for her. She had her phone in one hand, scrolling through something, barely glancing up. I didn't let her settle in. "How long have you known you were pregnant?" The words shot out of my mouth before I could even think about softening them. Lisa froze mid-step, her entire body locking up, her mouth opening slightly, but no words came out. Silence stretched between us. She finally swallowed, her voice barely above a whisper. I was preparing to tell you. I laughed. Preparing? I repeated, standing up from the couch, my entire body tense. Why the hell would you need preparation to tell your husband that you're pregnant? Or is the baby not mine? The second the words left my mouth, I saw it. That split-second hesitation. Lisa forced herself to recover, straightening her posture as she quickly blurted out, "Of course it's yours." I didn't believe her. Not for a second. I stepped closer, my voice low and firm. "We'll do a DNA test." She broke, letting out a choked, broken sob. "I don't know who the father is." I felt the words. It wasn't just a confession. It was a death sentence for everything we had built together. For months, I had felt something was wrong. I had questioned my own sanity and wondered if I was imagining things, if I was overreacting. But this was the confirmation I never wanted. I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to keep my voice steady. "Get ready. The divorce papers will be ready soon." Lisa dropped to her knees, sobbing, begging me to think about it, to not rush into this, to just give her a chance to explain. I didn't care anymore. There was nothing left to explain. Lisa didn't make it easy during the divorce. She didn't cry for long. She got angry. She fought, dragged out the process in court, and made everything as painful as possible. She wanted the house and spousal support, and argued that 5 years of marriage meant she deserved something. I let my lawyer handle it. I wasn't arguing. I wasn't giving her the satisfaction. Then came the DNA test. When the results came in, proving the baby wasn't mine, she shut down. No more fake justifications. No more fights over assets. She had nothing left to stand on. The court sided with me. She walked away with nothing significant. I don't regret leaving. Not for a second. If I had stayed, if I had let her manipulate me, I would have been raising another man's child, trapped in a lie I never asked for. By the time the divorce was finalized, I had already emotionally checked out. The fights, the lies, the long, drawn-out legal battles, it all drained me. It wasn't until months later that I finally got answers on the full story of Lisa's affair. Through mutual friends and bits of information that surfaced during court proceedings, I learned the full story. When Lisa found out she was pregnant, she went to her lover, the man she had risked everything for. She expected him to step up, to prove to her that she hadn't thrown away her marriage for nothing. Maybe deep down, she hoped he'd tell her they could be a real family, that he'd be the one to take care of her now that she had burned her bridges with me. But reality hit her hard. Her lover didn't want the baby. He told her, flat out, to get rid of it. He wasn't ready for a kid. He didn't want the responsibility. He wasn't about to rearrange his life for her. Lisa was shocked. She had convinced herself that leaving me meant she was heading toward something better, that she was walking into a new life where she'd finally be happy. But instead, she realized she had destroyed everything for nothing. And that's when she snapped. Instead of blaming herself for her choices, instead of facing the fact that she had made the worst mistake of her life, she let that anger fester, and she turned it on me. That's why she became distant. That's why she couldn't look at me. That's why she said she couldn't stand me. It had nothing to do with me. She was mad at herself. Mad that she had bet on the wrong man. Mad that she had given up a stable, committed husband for someone who tossed her aside the moment things got real. And I was just the easiest target for all that bitterness, regret, and self-hatred. She wasn't disgusted by me. She was disgusted by herself. But by the time I realized this, it didn't matter anymore. By then, I had already walked away. I'm grateful I paid attention. If I had ignored the signs, I could have been raising another man's child right now. That's the reality. Some men look away. They ignore the gut feeling when something feels off. They convince themselves that their wife or girlfriend is just going through a phase and that she'll come back to them eventually. But let me tell you something. If someone doesn't want you, you'll feel it. I felt it. And I'm glad I listened. It's better to be divorced than to raise a child born from betrayal. That's my truth. That's my lesson. And if you've made it this far into the story, I want to hear from you. Would you have handled it differently? Would you have forgiven her? Or would you have done exactly what I did? Walk away knowing you deserve better? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's talk about it. And if you found this story worth sharing, hit that like button, subscribe, and send it to someone who might need to hear this today. Thanks for watching. Until next time.